Hannah's hands were stained with sawdust, the faint scent of cedar wood clinging to her apron. She had just finished smoothing the edge of a chair she had been working on in her father's workshop, a quiet place tucked behind their old house. Her father was away, traveling across towns for reasons he rarely explained since her mother's death. The house felt emptier without him, but Hannah had learned to fill the silence with the hum of her tools. That evening, she heard a frantic knock on the wooden door. Wiping her hands on her apron, she opened it and found Tracy, her childhood friend, clutching a small suitcase, eyes red from tears. "Hannah, please, I don't have anywhere else to go. The landlord threw me out," Tracy said, her voice trembling. Without hesitation, Hannah ushered her inside. "You'll stay here. Father won't mind. You know this place is big enough." Tracy collapsed onto the sofa, sighing with relief. "You've always been a lifesaver." Hannah smiled softly, not knowing that behind her friends, gratitude brewed an ambition that would soon shatter her peace. Days slipped into weeks, and Tracy became part of Hannah's daily rhythm. She watched Hannah toil with wood, laughed at her lack of polish, and often teased her about her plain dresses. "You really don't know how to dress like a woman," Tracy would chuckle, brushing Hannah's hair back. "If Luke wasn't so in love with you, I'd say he's blind." At the mention of Luke, Hannah blushed. He was the chairman's son, a man who, against all odds, had chosen her over the sophisticated women in his circle. They had met at a community fair, and his charm had swept her away. To her, Luke was a dream, the kind of man she believed was far out of her reach. But Tracy's eyes lingered whenever Luke visited. The way she watched him, Hannah never noticed. And Luke, with his sharp suits and carefully rehearsed smiles, never hid the way he admired Tracy's confident flair. The stage for betrayal had quietly been set. Hannah's world began to wobble on its fragile foundation the day she received the white envelope. Tracy had been gone for 2 weeks, claiming she needed time to find herself. Hannah had thought little of it, busy with her workshop and dreaming of Luke's promises of marriage. The envelope bore her name in a neat golden script. She tore it open with curiosity. Inside, a card gleamed with embossed letters. The union of Luke Reynolds and Tracy Wallace. Her chest caved in. The air fled her lungs as her trembling fingers held the card. For a moment, she thought it was some cruel mistake, but as she read the date, the venue, and the words, "You are warmly invited," reality crashed down. Her friend and her lover had conspired behind her back. She went to the wedding in disbelief, dressed in the only gown she owned, a modest lavender dress her mother had left behind. The ceremony was a display of grandeur. Crystal chandeliers, violins playing, the crowd whispering praises of Luke's bride. And there, standing proudly in lace and pearls, was Tracy, her face radiant with victory. Hannah stood in the shadows, her heart breaking. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but her voice was swallowed by the laughter around her. After the wedding, she found Luke by the reception hall, away from the crowd. Her eyes swelled with tears as she begged, "Luke, why? Tell me this isn't true. Please reconsider. You promised me." Luke turned, his eyes cold. "Hannah, don't make a scene. Look at you. You lack etiquette. You never knew how to carry yourself, your dress sense. Shameful. I was embarrassed to be your man. Tracy is what I need, a woman who knows her worth." His words cut deeper than a blade. Hannah stumbled away, her vision blurred with tears. That night, she drowned herself in drink, sitting in a corner of a dim bar. Her glass clinked against the counter, her voice slurring as she whispered Luke's name again and again. When 3 men approached her, their intentions clear, she was too numb to fight. One grabbed her arm, the other smirked. But before they could drag her away, a hand gripped her shoulder firmly. "Let her go," a strong voice commanded. She turned and saw him, Benedict. His eyes burned with quiet authority, his presence enough to make the men retreat. He caught her as she swayed, her head lolling. "Come on, you're not safe here," he murmured, carrying her out into the cool night air. She didn't know him yet, but in that fragile moment, something within her shifted. The world had taken everything from her, but perhaps, unknowingly, it had given something back. Hannah woke the next morning to the soft creak of wood above her head. Her vision was hazy, her mouth dry. She realized she was lying on a couch in a small, neat apartment that smelled faintly of books and polished oak. A glass of water sat on the table beside her. The memory of last night came rushing back, Luke's cruel words, the bitter alcohol, the men at the bar. And then the stranger, the man who saved her. She sat up quickly, clutching the blanket around her. "You're awake," came a calm voice. Hannah turned. There he was, Benedict. He was standing by the window, sleeves rolled up, adjusting a sketch on his drawing board. He had a quiet intensity about him, nothing like Luke's polished arrogance. "You fainted outside the bar," he continued, not looking away from his work. "I couldn't just leave you there. Don't worry, nothing happened. You're safe." Her voice cracked with shame. "Why did you help me? You don't even know me." Finally, he looked at her. His eyes were steady, filled with a compassion she hadn't felt in weeks. Sometimes you don't need to know a person to know they're worth saving. Hannah's cheeks burned. She tugged at the blanket, embarrassed by her own state. "I shouldn't have. I made a fool of myself." "Maybe," Benedict said, shrugging lightly. "But fools can learn. That's better than those who stay blind." His words, though simple, settled deep inside her. For the first time since Luke's betrayal, she felt seen, not judged, not belittled, just seen. Over the following days, Benedict checked on her. He would stop by the workshop where she worked on furniture, bringing her coffee, sometimes standing quietly as she sanded the wood. One evening, as she struggled to carry a heavy wooden frame, he lifted it easily with a chuckle. "You're strong, Hannah, but you don't have to carry everything alone," he said. She stared at him, a lump forming in her throat. She wanted to argue, to say she had no choice, but something about his steady presence disarmed her. He began pointing out little things about her, how she walked, how she sat, how she wore her hair. "Straighten your back. Confidence isn't about money, it's about presence," he would say. "Try brighter colors, not just grays and browns. You'll feel alive in them." At first, she resisted, feeling awkward under his guidance. But Benedict had patience. And slowly, Hannah began to change. What she didn't know was that Benedict himself was fighting battles of his own, rivalries in his firm, a constant shadow cast by men like Luke. Yet, in teaching her to hold her head high, he was also reminding himself of the kind of strength that had nothing to do with wealth or titles. In that exchange of brokenness, something tender began to take root. Weeks turned into months, and Hannah became a quiet marvel. Gone was the girl who hid behind sawdust and plain clothes. In her place was a woman learning how to carry herself with grace. She still worked in her father's workshop, but her evenings belonged to Benedict, who taught her the subtleties of a world she had never been part of. One evening, he invited her to a small dinner with colleagues. Nervous, she fumbled with her fork and glass, unsure of the etiquette. Benedict leaned close, whispering, "Breathe, watch me, do as I do." His calm reassurance steadied her, and by the end of the night, she surprised herself with how well she fit in. Afterward, on their walk home, she laughed softly. "I must have looked ridiculous at first." Benedict smiled. "You looked human. That's all anyone needs to look. The rest is practice." His kindness stirred something within her that frightened her as much as it thrilled her. She hadn't thought she could ever feel this way again after Luke. Yet when Benedict brushed a strand of hair from her face or lingered when their hands touched, Her heart betrayed her with its quickening. One evening, he found her sitting outside her workshop, staring at the stars. She confessed, "I used to think Luke was my whole world. I thought losing him meant I'd lost myself too." Benedict sat beside her, his voice low. "Luke didn't see you, Hannah, not really. He saw what he wanted, and when you didn't fit, he left. But you are becoming, and that's far greater than anything you lost." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from despair. They were from hope. Their bond deepened, yet Hannah's heart was cautious. Shadows of betrayal still haunted her, and she often asked herself if she could ever trust love again. Benedict never pushed her. He simply stayed, patient, consistent, a steady hand guiding her back to herself. It was during this season of renewal that word began to spread. The National Architectural Design Contest was returning, a wager that gathered the greatest firms in the country. The news stirred whispers across town. Hannah's father, long silent in his grief since her mother's death, suddenly found himself courted by rival firms eager for his unmatched brilliance. Among them were two names that caught Hannah's attention, Reynolds and Co., Luke's father's empire, and Benedict's own firm. For the first time in years, her father considered picking up his pen again. And without realizing it, Hannah stood at the crossroads of a storm that would bring all her past, her present, and her future colliding in one place. The sound of graphite scratching paper filled the quiet sitting room. Hannah paused at the doorway, her eyes widening at the sight before her. Her father, Charles Morgan, who had abandoned his drafting tools after her mother's death, was seated at his old desk once more. A lamp glowed over his shoulder, illuminating lines that danced across the paper like poetry made solid. She hadn't seen him this alive in years. His hands, though aged, moved with precision. There was an energy in him that made Hannah's chest swell with pride. "Father," she whispered. He looked up, his eyes soft. "I thought I'd buried this part of me, Hannah, but they came, firms, old rivals, new blood. They want me to participate as one of the judges in the contest. It stirred something in me I thought I'd lost." Hannah stepped inside, her hands folded. "Then do it. You were born to build. I can see it in you." Charles sighed. "This wager, it is not just about designs. It is politics, power, reputation. I want no part of that. Yet something tells me I cannot hide forever." Later that week, Hannah discovered who some of those suitors were. She overheard a conversation in town. Luke's father, Mr. Reynolds, had announced his firm's entry into the contest. The same contest Benedict's firm had been preparing for months. Two rivals sharpening their teeth for the prize. When she told Benedict about her father's sudden return to the drawing board, his eyes gleamed with curiosity. "Charles Morgan, your father, the Charles Morgan, that explains you." "Explains me," she frowned. "You carry wood and shape it with patience. That's an architect's daughter for you, building, creating, not afraid to get dirt under your nails." Hannah blushed, caught off guard by the compliment. But beneath the quiet joy of her father's revival, a shadow stirred. Luke, having heard whispers that Hannah was Charles Morgan's daughter, grew restless. His father had already scolded him for marrying Tracy, saying, "If you had kept Hannah, she would have been our greatest asset. The girl is blood to a legend." Shame and regret gnawed at him. And though he had once tossed Hannah aside without care, the thought of her transformation and her father's prestige made him ache with a bitter longing. Hannah's reflection in the mirror startled her. For years, she had hidden behind plain skirts and dust-streaked aprons. Now, under Benedict's careful guidance, her posture was straighter, her clothes chosen with thought, her hair styled with grace. She still recognized herself, but it was as though the woman in the mirror carried a new kind of strength. Benedict arrived that evening with a parcel. "For the gala," he said. My firm is hosting it before the contest begins. You'll come with me." She hesitated, clutching the dress inside the box. It was a deep emerald gown, simple yet elegant. "I don't belong in such gatherings," she murmured. "You belong anywhere you choose to stand," Benedict replied firmly. "Besides, it is time the world saw you as you are now." At the gala, heads turned. Hannah felt their eyes, the whispers trailing after her. Some murmured surprise, others curiosity. Tracy was there, dazzling in jewels, her hand tightly gripping Luke's arm. When her gaze landed on Hannah, her smile faltered ever so slightly. Luke, on the other hand, froze. He could barely recognize her, the grace in her steps, the quiet confidence in her eyes. Gone was the girl he had mocked. This Hannah looked every bit a lady of standing. He approached her when Benedict stepped aside to speak with colleagues. "Hannah," he began, his voice almost a plea, "you've changed." She turned, her eyes cold as steel. "Or maybe I was always this, Luke. You just never cared to see." His jaw tightened. "I made a mistake. Tracy is not." "Enough," she cut him off, her voice steady. "You chose your path, stay on it." Before he could reply, Benedict returned, slipping an arm gently around Hannah's back. His presence both protective and proud. The message was clear. As the night wore on, Benedict's rivals whispered of his boldness, his closeness to Charles Morgan's daughter. The contest loomed ahead, and allegiances were shifting like sand. Meanwhile, Luke's father watched his son with disappointment, muttering to an associate, "That girl will ruin him twice, first by leaving and now by rising." But for Hannah, it was no longer about Luke, nor about revenge. For the first time in her life, she stood tall, not because someone loved her, but because she had learned to love herself. What she didn't know yet was that the storm was only gathering strength, and her choices would soon decide not only her heart, but the fate of two empires. The morning paper carried his name in bold letters. Charles Morgan appointed as chief judge for the National Architectural Design Contest. The announcement spread like wildfire. Critics wondered why a man who had withdrawn from the public eye for nearly a decade had accepted. Admirers hailed it as justice, that talent could not be buried by grief forever. For Hannah, the news was bittersweet. She watched her father reading the article with quiet detachment, his spectacles resting on the bridge of his nose. Pride surged in her chest. He was once again seen as the genius he truly was, but worry gnawed at her. Power attracts wolves, and she knew the contest was not just about creativity, but influence. Her fears proved justified that very week. Reynolds arrived in the evening, stepping from his polished black car with Luke beside him. He entered their home without ceremony, his silver hair slicked back, his suit sharp as his smile. The air seemed to thicken the moment he crossed the threshold. "Charles," he greeted smoothly, lowering himself into the armchair without invitation. "You know why I'm here." Charles regarded him coolly. "You are a man of business, Reynolds. I expected you might come." Reynolds leaned forward, his voice dripping persuasion. "We both understand what this contest really means. Not just aesthetics, not just innovation, legacy. My firm has carried the weight of this industry for years. With your support, we can secure the crown. In return, your family will never know one again, a figure beyond measure." Hannah, who had been setting tea at the side table, froze. The audacity of it burned her chest. She glanced at her father, but his face betrayed nothing. Charles set his teacup down, his tone calm but ironclad. "Architecture is not a trade of integrity for gold. If you have come to buy my judgment, you are wasting your time." Reynolds's smile faltered. "Think carefully. One decision could change everything for your daughter." It was then Hannah stepped forward, unable to contain herself. "Leave our home. My father owes you nothing." For For the first time, irritation flickered across Reynolds's composed face. He rose, brushing invisible dust from his sleeve. "You'll regret this." Then, turning to Luke, he said in a low, commanding voice, "Win her back. Do you hear me? If Benedict's firm triumphs and she stands with him, we lose everything. Whatever it takes, bring Hannah to our side." Luke's jaw tightened. He glanced at Hannah, whose eyes were cold and steady, then nodded without a word. As they left, Hannah turned to her father, her voice trembling. "Papa, what if they try again? What if they—" Charles raised a hand. His eyes were tired but resolute. "Hannah, I have lived too long to be bought. Reynolds may tempt me, but I will not stain your mother's memory nor my own name for his empire." For the first time since the announcement, Hannah felt a strange calm. Her father was not just a judge of buildings, he was a judge of men, and no bribe could shake the foundation he stood upon. Yet deep within her, unease lingered. Luke had been given a task, and she knew he was not a man to defy his father's command. Tracy sat before her dressing mirror, the lamplight catching the glimmer of her earrings. The jewels sparkled, but her eyes did not. Marriage had not given her the glory she dreamed of. Luke was restless, distracted, often leaving home without explanation. When he returned, their conversations turned quickly to quarrels. She accused, he deflected. She demanded, he shrugged. The silk gowns in her wardrobe and the perfumes on her shelf no longer comforted her. But the bitterness in her mouth grew sharper the night she saw Hannah again. At the gala, Hannah entered on Benedict's arm. Her gown was emerald silk, simple yet striking, hugging her frame with an elegance Tracy could not deny. She no longer resembled the naive girl who once begged Luke to stay. Her head was high, her smile warm, her steps graceful. And Benedict, he looked at her with a pride Tracy had never once received from Luke. A cold fire stirred in Tracy's chest. She turned away, but the sight haunted her all evening. Later, when Benedict stepped away from Hannah to take a call, Tracy followed him down the marble corridor. He stood by the balcony, city lights flickering below. His face, calm and thoughtful, made her pulse quicken, not from love, but from envy and challenge. "Benedict," she said softly, letting her voice curl like silk. He turned, surprised. "Tracy." She stepped closer, her perfume strong in the night air. "You've done wonders with her. Hannah was once plain, awkward. Now she shines. But tell me, aren't you curious how much brighter life could be with a woman who already knows the world?" Her hand brushed his sleeve, deliberate, bold. Her lips curved into a smile that had lured men before. "A man like you deserves more than an unfinished girl." Benedict's eyes darkened. He pulled his arm back, his voice low but sharp. "Enough." Her smile faltered, but she pressed on, her pride refusing to yield. "She is still learning, Benedict. She will always be behind you. I could match you. I could." "Don't insult her." His tone cut like steel. "Hannah is worth 10 of you. Her honesty, her courage, her heart, those are things you'll never understand. Whatever game you're playing, leave me out of it, and leave her alone." The words struck harder than any slap. Tracy stiffened, her face pale in the moonlight. For the first time, she had been dismissed, discarded as if she were nothing. She turned sharply, her heels clattering against the floor, and disappeared back into the hall. Benedict exhaled, steadying himself. He hated the cruelty of his words, but he hated deception more. His loyalty to Hannah was unshakable, and no temptation could bend it. But elsewhere that week, Luke played his father's command. He found Hannah alone after one of her errands, the street lamps casting shadows on the quiet lane. His voice carried a note of desperation she had never heard before. "Hannah." She turned, startled. "Luke, what do you want?" He stepped closer, his face troubled. "I was wrong about everything. Tracy and I, it's not what you think. I was foolish to let you go. Foolish to hurt you. I want to make it right. Hannah's eyes searched his, and for a fleeting moment old memories stirred. The boy she once loved, the laughter they once shared. But then she remembered the wedding invitation, the cruel insults, the nights of grief drowned in drink. She drew a steady breath. "Luke," she said quietly, her voice firm, "there was a time I would have given anything to hear those words. I prayed for them. I begged for them. But that time is gone. You destroyed it. You destroyed me. And now nothing you say can bring it back." He flinched as though her words were arrows. "Hannah, please." "No," she shook her head, stepping back. "You will never have me again." Her refusal hung in the air like a final judgment. Luke stood frozen, shame burning his face. For the first time, he realized Hannah was no longer the naive girl who once begged him to stay. She had become a woman beyond his reach. And with that, he knew he had lost not only her, but the last chance at redemption he might ever have. The contest hall was alive with energy. Models of steel and glass glittered beneath the lights, towering sketches lined the walls, and murmurs filled the air as the greatest firms in the nation prepared to present. Judges sat in a semicircle, their expressions unreadable, pens ready to note every detail. Charles Morgan sat among them, his presence commanding quiet respect. His hair had grayed with years, his face carved by sorrow and wisdom, yet his eyes were steady. He was not here as Hannah's father, but as a man trusted to weigh brilliance against arrogance, truth against pretense. Benedict stood across the hall with his colleagues, calm yet alert. His model, a design that blended innovation with humanity, stood proudly on its pedestal. Its form was sleek, yet inviting, the kind of structure that breathed life into those who entered it. Reynolds & Co. presented first. Their design was massive, ambitious, shimmering with glass and steel. It was a monument to wealth, a skyscraper that screamed power. Applause rose, but so did whispers, impressive yet cold like a castle with no heart. Next came Benedict's turn. He walked to the podium, carrying no arrogance, only conviction. He spoke of community, of spaces where light and air embraced those within. His words were simple, his vision profound. The audience leaned in, drawn by his sincerity. When the presentation ended, silence lingered for a breath, then applause broke like a wave. Hannah, watching from her seat, felt her chest swell with pride. She had known from the beginning that Benedict was not only gifted but true. But the battle was not over. As the judges gathered in the private chamber to deliberate, Reynolds seized his chance. He cornered Charles in the dim corridor, his voice low, his eyes sharp. "This is your moment to make the right choice," Reynolds pressed. "Our design represents strength. Choose us, and I'll see your family never knows another day of need. Land, wealth, influence, everything at your fingertips." Charles's gaze was cold. "I did not return to this field to peddle justice for your empire." Reynolds's smile thinned. "You speak of honor, but you have a daughter. Think of her future. Think of what happens if she stands by the wrong man." Before Charles could answer, Hannah stepped from the shadows. Her face was pale, her eyes burning. "Enough." Reynolds blinked, startled. "You never change," Hannah said, her voice trembling but strong. "When I was with Luke, you looked down on me, dismissed me, used me like a pawn for your pride. And now you stand here trying to buy my father as you once tried to buy me. But we are not for sale." Her words cut through the silence like a blade. Charles placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. His voice, calm but firm, followed. "You have shown me your design, Reynolds. It is cold, soulless, built to cast shadows, not to shelter lives. My judgment cannot be swayed, and your threats only reveal the weakness beneath your grandeur." Reynolds's face tightened, anger flickering in his eyes. He turned abruptly, his footsteps echoing as he stalked away. Hannah looked up at her father. "Papa, will they try again?" Charles gave a faint smile, weary but resolute. "Let them. The truth does not bend, and tonight it will stand." When they returned to the hall, Hannah caught Benedict's gaze across the room. His eyes asked a question without words, and her answering nod told him everything. Her father's honor remained unbroken. The judges prepared to announce their decision. The room hushed, breaths held, futures hanging on the balance. And for Hannah, it was not only the contest of designs, but the battle of hearts, integrity against corruption, loyalty against betrayal. And she prayed the world would see what she already knew. Benedict was the man who deserved the crown. The contest hall had grown still, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Rows of spectators leaned forward in silence. The judges sat solemn, their notes closed, their decision sealed in a single folded paper resting in Charles Morgan's hand. Hannah's heart raced. She glanced at Benedict, who stood with quiet composure among his colleagues. His eyes, steady as ever, met hers across the room. He did not wear the nervousness of ambition, but the calm of a man who had already won in the only way that mattered, by remaining true. Charles rose to his feet. The weight of the moment pressed upon him, yet his voice rang with clarity. "Tonight, we have witnessed designs of grandeur, ambition, and vision. But this contest is not about size or cost. It is about creating a future where architecture serves life, not pride." He paused, unfolding the paper with deliberate calm. "The winner of the National Architectural Design Contest, whose work combines innovation with humanity, is Benedict Harrington." The room erupted. Applause thundered through the hall. Some leapt to their feet. Cameras flashed. Benedict's colleagues embraced him with shouts of triumph. Hannah's eyes blurred with tears. She clapped until her palms stung, her chest so full of pride it nearly broke her. She rose, unable to stop smiling, unable to stop trembling with joy. Across the hall, Reynolds sat stone-faced, his jaw clenched, his empire humiliated. He rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, and stormed toward the exit. Luke followed, his shoulders slumped, his face pale with shame. Tracy trailed behind them, her eyes darting to Hannah in bitter fury. For once, she was not the woman in the spotlight. She was the shadow fading behind someone else's glow. On stage, Benedict accepted the award. He bowed his head as the judges praised his vision, his integrity, his ability to balance art and purpose. But his eyes kept straying to the crowd, searching for only one person. When the ceremony ended and the crowd spilled into the night, Hannah found him outside under the canopy of stars. The evening air was cool, the city lights glittering in the distance. He stood waiting, the award tucked under his arm, but his gaze fixed entirely on her. "You did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He shook his head gently. "We did it. Every moment I spent building this design, I thought of what I learned from you. That strength isn't coldness. That beauty isn't pride. You helped me see the world differently." Her eyes filled with fresh tears. "Benedict, this is your victory. Don't give me credit for what you've earned." He stepped closer, his voice soft but unwavering. "Then let me say it plainly. I don't care about the title. I don't care about the prize. All I care about is this. Hannah, I love you." The words stole her breath. She had once begged Luke to say those very words, only to be broken. But now, standing beneath the night sky, hearing them spoken with honesty, she realized she had finally found what she once thought impossible: love that was true. Her lips trembled into a smile. "I love you too, Benedict." He drew her into his arms, and she let herself fall into the warmth she had long been denied. Their kiss was not desperate, not born of betrayal or regret, but steady, certain, a seal upon the life they would build together. From the shadows, Charles Morgan watched silently. For years he had feared his daughter's heart would remain shattered by loss. But now, seeing her strong and radiant beside the man who had earned her trust, he allowed himself a small, contented smile. The contest had crowned its victor, but so had life. Not Reynolds, not Luke, not Tracy. No, the triumph belonged to Hannah and Benedict. Not only for the award, but for surviving betrayal, for choosing truth, and for finding love where it was least expected. And as the night deepened, Hannah knew with certainty she was no longer the naive girl who once begged to be loved. She was a woman who had risen from the ruins, rebuilt stronger, and found a love worth keeping.